In a bustling city where the streets buzzed with life and secrets, an unexpected chain of events was about to unfold. It was a story that would shake the foundations of justice and reveal the cracks within the system. This is the tale of Officer Ryan Carter, whose ambition blinded him, and Dr. Evelyn Hayes, a woman whose quiet strength hid a powerful truth. Part 1. The Setup. Officer Ryan Carter had always dreamed of being more than just another uniform in the crowd. He wanted recognition, respect, and a name people whispered with awe. But ambition can be a dangerous thing when it's not tempered by morality. Ryan wasn't a bad man. He just believed that sometimes you had to bend the rules to get ahead. And on this particular evening, he thought he saw his chance. It all started with a tip. An anonymous caller claimed there was suspicious activity involving a black sedan parked near an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The caller said the driver might be involved in illegal activities, though they didn't provide much detail. To Ryan, it sounded like the perfect opportunity to make a big arrest, one that could boost his career and impress his superiors. Little did he know, this seemingly ordinary case would spiral into something far beyond what he could have imagined. Ryan arrived at the location just after sunset. The air was cool, and the streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. The black sedan sat alone under a flickering lamppost, its windows slightly fogged from the evening chill. Ryan approached cautiously, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. He peered inside the car but saw nothing unusual, just a few papers, scattered on the passenger seat, and an empty coffee cup in the cup holder. "This has to be it," Ryan muttered to himself, scanning the area. There was no sign of anyone nearby. Whoever owned the car must have stepped away for a moment. Ryan hesitated for a second, then glanced over his shoulder. The street was deserted, no one was watching. His heart raced as an idea began to form in his mind, an idea that felt reckless yet irresistible. Reaching into his pocket, Ryan pulled out a small plastic bag containing white powder. It wasn't much, just enough to catch someone's attention, but it was enough to ruin lives if used correctly. Ryan had acquired it weeks ago during a raid, intending to use it as leverage if needed. Now, he saw his chance. With trembling hands, he opened the car door, careful not to leave fingerprints. He slipped the bag into the glove compartment, closed it gently, and stepped back, exhaling sharply. "There," he whispered, a smirk spreading across his face. "Let's see how you explain this." What Ryan didn't realize was that the owner of the car was none other than Dr. Evelyn Hayes. Evelyn was a remarkable woman who had dedicated her life to fighting crime. She held a doctorate in criminal psychology and had spent years working undercover to dismantle some of the most dangerous drug cartels in the country. Recently, she had been promoted to chief of the DEA's local division, a position she kept hidden from almost everyone except those closest to her. Her unassuming appearance and quiet demeanor made her the perfect candidate for covert operations, allowing her to move through the world unnoticed. That evening, Evelyn had returned from a high-stakes mission in another state. Exhausted but satisfied with her work, she decided to stop for dinner before heading home. After parking her car near the warehouse district, she walked to a nearby diner to grab a quick bite. As she sat sipping her coffee, she reflected on the challenges ahead. The fight against corruption never ended, and every victory came with new battles to face. When Evelyn finally returned to her car, she noticed something odd. A police cruiser was parked behind her sedan, its lights flashing brightly in the darkness. Confused, she approached cautiously, only to find Officer Ryan Carter standing beside her vehicle, his expression smug and self-assured. "Ma'am, I need you to step back," Ryan said, holding up a hand. "We've found evidence of illegal substances in your car." Evelyn froze, her mind racing. She knew better than to panic or argue. Instead, she raised her hand slowly and met his gaze with calm determination. "I don't know how that got there," she replied evenly. "I haven't touched anything illegal," Ryan scoffed, clearly unconvinced. "Save it for the station," he said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. As he secured them around her wrists, Evelyn felt a surge of anger, but also resolve. She understood that reacting impulsively would only worsen the situation. For now, she needed to stay composed and gather information. Someone had set her up, and she intended to find out who and why. At the precinct, Evelyn requested her one phone call, a right guaranteed to every detainee. She dialed a number known only to a select few, connecting with Agent Marcus Lane, her most trusted colleague. In hushed tones, she explained what had happened and instructed him to retrieve surveillance footage from cameras in the area. If there was any proof of foul play, Marcus would find it. Meanwhile, Ryan basked in the glory of his supposed success. Back at the station, he regaled his fellow officers with tales of his brilliant discovery. They clapped him on the back, congratulating him on a job well done. None of them suspected the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Unbeknownst to Ryan, his actions had set off a chain reaction that would expose not only his own corruption, but also the rot festering within the department. As Evelyn sat in her cell, her thoughts turned to the bigger picture. This wasn't just about her. It was about the countless others who had fallen victim to similar schemes. Justice wasn't blind, as people often claimed. It was manipulated, twisted, and abused by those in power. And Evelyn was determined to change that. For now, she bided her time, knowing that the truth would eventually come to light. But she also knew that exposing Ryan's wrongdoing would require patience, strategy, and unwavering resolve. The game was far from over, and Evelyn Hayes was ready to play. The precinct buzzed with activity as Officer Ryan Carter proudly escorted Evelyn to the booking desk. His chest puffed out with pride, Ryan relished the attention from his colleagues. To them, he was a hero, a sharp-eyed officer who had caught a criminal red-handed. But what they didn't know was that the so-called evidence against Evelyn had been planted by Ryan himself. Evelyn, on the other hand, remained eerily calm. Her face betrayed no emotion, as she stood quietly while her fingerprints were taken and her mugshot snapped. She knew better than to fight back or protest too loudly. Years of working undercover had taught her that patience was key in situations like this. Instead of reacting impulsively, she observed everything around her, the officers whispering among themselves, the flickering fluorescent lights above, even the faint scent of stale coffee lingering in the air. Every detail mattered, and Evelyn was determined to use it all to her advantage. As the process dragged on, Ryan couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. Despite Evelyn's composed demeanor, there was something about her that unsettled him. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, not with fear or anger, but with an almost piercing clarity, as if she could see right through him. Or maybe it was the fact that she hadn't broken down or begged for mercy like most suspects did. Whatever it was, Ryan tried to shake off the feeling and focus on the task at hand. Once the formalities were completed, Evelyn was led to a holding cell. As the heavy metal door clanged shut behind her, she finally allowed herself a moment of reflection. Sitting on the cold, hard bench, she replayed the events of the evening in her mind. Someone had deliberately targeted her, and Ryan was merely a pawn in a much larger game. But who? And why? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. A young officer appeared outside the cell, sliding a tray of food through the slot at the bottom of the door. "Dinner," he muttered awkwardly before hurrying away. Evelyn glanced at the tray: stale bread, a thin slice of cheese, and a cup of lukewarm water. But she wasn't hungry. Food was the last thing on her mind. Instead, she focused on formulating a plan. Earlier, during her phone call with Agent Marcus Lane, she had instructed him to gather surveillance footage from nearby cameras. If anyone could uncover the truth, it was Marcus. He was meticulous, resourceful, and fiercely loyal. Evelyn trusted him implicitly, knowing he wouldn't rest until he found answers. Back at his office, Marcus wasted no time. After hanging up the phone, he immediately began reviewing security camera feeds from the area where Evelyn's car had been parked. It didn't take long for him to spot something unusual. One particular camera captured a grainy but unmistakable image of Ryan tampering with Evelyn's vehicle. The footage showed him opening the glove compartment, slipping something inside and then stepping back with a satisfied grin. Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his heart pounding. This was exactly the proof they needed to expose Ryan's corruption. But as he continued watching, he noticed something else, another figure lurking in the shadows nearby. At first glance, it appeared to be just a passerby, but upon closer inspection, Marcus realized it was someone familiar. It was Detective Harris, a senior officer known for bending the rules to suit his own agenda. Could Harris have orchestrated this entire setup? Determined to find out, Marcus dug deeper. He accessed internal records and discovered a troubling pattern. Over the past few years, several cases handled by Ryan and Harris had fallen apart due to questionable evidence. Suspects claimed they were framed, witnesses recanted their statements, and juries dismissed charges citing lack of credibility. Yet, despite these red flags, neither Ryan nor Harris had faced any consequences. In fact, both men had risen quickly, through the ranks, earning promotions and accolades along the way. It became clear to Marcus that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a systemic problem within the department. Corrupt officers like Ryan and Harris operated with impunity, protected by those higher up the chain of command. And now, they had crossed a line by targeting Evelyn, a woman whose reputation and authority far exceeded theirs. While Marcus worked tirelessly behind the scenes, Evelyn's arrest began making waves throughout the department. News spread quickly, sparking heated debates among officers. Some believed she was guilty, pointing to the damning evidence found in her car. Others weren't so sure. They whispered about how unlikely it seemed for someone of her stature to be involved in such a blatant crime. After all, Evelyn Hayes wasn't just any ordinary citizen. She was the newly appointed chief of the DEA's local division. Why would someone in her position risk everything for a small bag of drugs? Despite the skepticism, Ryan refused to entertain the possibility that he might have made a mistake. To him, Evelyn was just another suspect, one more notch on his belt of supposed accomplishments. He strutted around the precinct, boasting about his big catch and basking in the praise of his peers. But beneath his confident exterior, doubt gnawed at him. The more he thought about Evelyn's calm demeanor and unwavering composure, the more he questioned whether he had underestimated her. Meanwhile, Evelyn used her time in custody wisely. Under the guise of cooperating with investigators, she provided them with crucial information about ongoing drug trafficking operations. She named names, shared locations, and revealed connections that only someone with her level of expertise would know. Her contributions not only demonstrated her credibility, but also shifted the narrative surrounding her arrest. Slowly but surely, people began to see her less as a suspect and more as a victim of a malicious setup. By the end of the second day, tensions were running high. Internal Affairs had launched an investigation into Ryan's conduct, prompted by an anonymous tip, courtesy of Marcus. Officers who had once cheered for Ryan now avoided eye contact, sensing that the tide was turning against him. Even Detective Harris seemed uneasy, retreating to his office and keeping a low profile. For Evelyn, the wait was excruciating. She knew the truth would eventually come to light, but each passing hour felt like an eternity. Still, she refused to let frustration get the better of her. Instead, she focused on staying strong and preparing for the inevitable fallout. When the truth finally emerged, she wanted to be ready, not just to clear her name, but to hold those responsible accountable for their actions. And so, as the sun set on the second day, the stage was set for a dramatic confrontation. The pieces were falling into place, and the web of lies spun by Ryan and his accomplices was beginning to unravel. What had started as a simple act of corruption was about to explode into a scandal that would rock the entire department and change the lives of everyone involved forever. As dawn broke over the city, the precinct was abuzz with whispered conversations and uneasy glances. Word had spread like wildfire about the ongoing investigation into Officer Ryan Carter's conduct. For some officers, it was a wake-up call, a stark reminder that even the most seemingly untouchable among them could be held accountable. For others, it was a source of dread, knowing full well that one man's actions might expose the cracks in the entire system. Agent Marcus Lane worked tirelessly behind the scenes, piecing together the puzzle that would bring Ryan's scheme crumbling down. Armed with the damning surveillance footage and internal records, Marcus knew he had enough to raise serious questions about Ryan's integrity. But he also understood that exposing Ryan alone wouldn't be enough. This wasn't just about one rogue officer. It was about dismantling an entire network of corruption that had festered within the department for years. Marcus began by presenting his findings to Internal Affairs. The head of the division, a stern woman named Captain Linda Ramirez, listened intently as Marcus laid out the evidence. On the screen before them, the grainy but unmistakable video showed Ryan planting the bag of drugs in Evelyn's car. Captain Ramirez's expression hardened as she watched the footage, her jaw tightening with each passing second. "This is troubling," she said finally, leaning back in her chair. "If this is true, it's not just negligence, it's deliberate misconduct." Marcus nodded gravely. "It gets worse," he added, pulling up documents on his laptop. He explained how Ryan's actions fit into a larger pattern of questionable behavior. Multiple cases handled by Ryan and his mentor, Detective Harris, had collapsed under scrutiny due to unreliable evidence. Witnesses had recanted their testimonies, claiming they had been coerced or bribed. Suspects accused of crimes they didn't commit walked free after judges dismissed charges based on inconsistencies in the prosecution's case. Captain Ramirez listened silently, her eyes narrowing as the magnitude of the situation sank in. She ordered an immediate review of all cases involving Ryan and Harris, instructing her team to dig deep for any signs of foul play. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his own investigation, determined to uncover the full extent of the corruption. While the gears of justice turned slowly, Evelyn remained detained, though her circumstances improved slightly. After providing investigators with valuable information about ongoing drug operations, she earned a small measure of goodwill from some members of the department. A few officers began visiting her cell, not to interrogate her, but to apologize. They admitted they had doubted her innocence at first, but now saw the absurdity of accusing someone of her stature of such a blatant crime. One such officer was Detective Lisa Chen, a young woman who had always admired Evelyn's work. "I'm sorry we didn't believe you sooner," Lisa said softly during one of her visits. "You've done so much for this city. It's wrong what they're doing to you." Evelyn offered a faint smile, appreciating the gesture. "Thank you," she replied. "But don't apologize for doing your job. What matters now is making sure this doesn't happen again, to me or anyone else." Lisa nodded, visibly moved. From that moment on, she became one of Evelyn's strongest allies within the department, quietly advocating for her release and supporting Marcus's efforts to expose the truth. Meanwhile, Ryan grew increasingly agitated as the net tightened around him. At first, he tried to brush off the investigation, convinced that his connections and reputation would shield him from consequences. But as days passed and more evidence came to light, cracks began to show in his confident facade. He started avoiding his colleagues, retreating to empty hallways and smoking cigarettes outside the station. His once boastful demeanor gave way to paranoia, and he jumped at every knock on his office door. Detective Harris, too, felt the heat closing in. Unlike Ryan, however, Harris had decades of experience covering his tracks. He called an emergency, meeting with Ryan late one evening, dragging him into a dimly lit interrogation room where they wouldn't be overheard. "What were you thinking?" Harris hissed, slamming a folder onto the table. Inside were copies of the surveillance footage and internal reports linking Ryan to multiple instances of misconduct. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've put us both in jeopardy," Ryan stammered, struggling to defend himself. I thought it would be easy. No one was supposed to find out." Harris pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling sharply. "Easy? Nothing is ever easy when it comes to framing someone, especially someone like her." He jabbed a finger at the folder. "Did you even stop to consider who she is? She's not just another suspect, Ryan. She's the DEA chief. Do you understand what that means?" Ryan swallowed hard, his bravado completely evaporated. For the first time, he realized the gravity of his mistake. Framing a random citizen was one thing, but targeting Evelyn Hayes? That was like poking a hornet's nest with a stick. "We need to fix this," Harris muttered, pacing back and forth. "We need to make sure nothing ties back to us." "But how?" Ryan asked desperately. "They already have the footage. They know I planted the evidence." Harris stopped pacing and turned to face him, his eyes cold and calculating. "Then we give them someone else to blame, someone expendable." The implication hung heavy in the air. Ryan hesitated, unsure if he was willing to go that far. But Harris didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed the folder and stormed out of the room, leaving Ryan alone with his thoughts and his mounting fear. Back in her cell, Evelyn sensed that the tide was turning. Though still confined, she could feel the atmosphere shifting. Officers, who had once regarded her with suspicion, now greeted her with respect, or at least a newfound wariness. Even the food trays delivered to her cell seemed less stale, as if someone had taken care to ensure she was treated better. One afternoon, Captain Ramirez herself paid Evelyn a visit. Standing outside the cell, she cleared her throat awkwardly before speaking. "Dr. Hayes," she began, her tone formal yet respectful, "I want to personally apologize for the treatment you've received. We're working diligently to resolve this matter." Evelyn studied her for a moment before responding. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your efforts, but I hope you understand that this isn't just about me. If we don't address the root of the problem, the culture that allows officers like Ryan and Harris to operate unchecked, then nothing will change." Ramirez nodded solemnly. "You're absolutely right. And rest assured, we're taking steps to ensure accountability moving forward." As the captain walked away, Evelyn allowed herself a small sigh of relief. She knew the fight was far from over, but at least progress was being made, with Marcus and Lisa working tirelessly to expose the truth, and Captain Ramirez committed to reform. Evelyn felt a renewed sense of hope. By the end of the week, the investigation reached a tipping point. Internal Affairs presented their findings to the police chief, laying bare the extent of Ryan's wrongdoing. The surveillance footage was undeniable proof of his guilt, and his attempts to justify his actions only dug him deeper into trouble. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Ryan cracked under pressure during questioning. He confessed to planting the drugs in Evelyn's car and implicated Detective Harris, revealing how the senior officer had pressured him into targeting individuals they deemed expendable. The revelation sent shockwaves through the department. Harris was immediately suspended pending further investigation, while Ryan was stripped of his badge and arrested. Both men faced multiple charges, including falsifying evidence, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Their arrests marked the beginning of a broader crackdown on corruption within the force. For Evelyn, the ordeal was far from pleasant, but it reinforced her belief in the importance of transparency and accountability. As she prepared to leave the precinct, finally free of the charges against her, she reflected on the lessons learned. The system was flawed, yes, but it wasn't beyond repair. With dedication and courage, it could be rebuilt stronger than before. And so, as Evelyn stepped out into the sunlight, she carried with her not just a sense of vindication, but a renewed purpose. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but she was ready to face it head-on. Justice might be slow, but it was worth fighting for, and Evelyn Hayes was just the woman to lead the charge. The fallout from Ryan Carter's confession rippled through the department like a tidal wave, leaving destruction and disbelief in its wake. Officers who had once idolized Ryan for his supposed successes now avoided him altogether, their faces etched with shame or anger. Detective Harris, too, found himself isolated, his once untouchable status crumbling under the weight of accusations. The precinct, usually bustling with activity, became eerily quiet as everyone braced for the storm that was about to hit. Evelyn Hayes walked out of the station for the first time in days, her head held high despite the ordeal she had endured. Reporters swarmed around her, shoving microphones in her face and shouting questions. Cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing every step she took. Evelyn stopped briefly, raising a hand to silence the chaos. When the crowd finally settled, She spoke in a calm but firm voice. "I am grateful for the support I've received during this difficult time," she began, her tone measured. "But let me be clear. This is not just about me. It's about exposing the flaws in a system that allows corruption to thrive. Justice must prevail, not just for those who wear badges, but for the communities they are sworn to protect." Her words resonated deeply, earning nods of approval from some officers and murmurs of agreement from bystanders. For many, Evelyn's arrest had been a wake-up call, a stark reminder that no one, regardless of rank or reputation, was above scrutiny. As she climbed into an unmarked car driven by Agent Marcus Lane, the reporters dispersed, their headlines already written. Inside the vehicle, Marcus glanced at Evelyn, concern etched on his face. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly. Evelyn sighed, leaning back against the seat. "I've been better," she admitted, "but I'll survive. What matters now is making sure this doesn't happen again. To anyone." Marcus nodded, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "We're going to hold them accountable, Evelyn, every last one of them." Back at the precinct, Internal Affairs worked around the clock to unravel the web of corruption exposed by Ryan's confession. Captain Linda Ramirez personally oversaw the investigation, determined to root out every trace of misconduct. She called a meeting with her team, laying out their next steps. "We've got Ryan and Harris," she said, pacing in front of the room. "But we know they didn't act alone. This goes deeper, much deeper. We need to identify everyone involved and ensure they face consequences." The team nodded, their expressions grim. They knew the task ahead wouldn't be easy. Some officers might resist, clinging to their badges and denying any wrongdoing. Others might try to cover their tracks, destroying evidence or intimidating witnesses. But Ramirez was resolute. "If we don't clean house now," she warned, "this will keep happening, and the public's trust in us will erode completely." As well, the investigation expanded. More shocking revelations came to light. Several senior officers were implicated in a scheme to frame individuals from marginalized communities, using planted evidence to boost arrest statistics and secure promotions. These victims, often without resources or legal representation, had been railroaded into convictions based on lies. Their stories painted a harrowing picture of systemic injustice, one that Evelyn vowed to dismantle piece by piece. Meanwhile, Evelyn returned to work, though not in the capacity most expected. Instead of diving straight back into her role as DEA chief, she focused on addressing the cultural issues within law enforcement. She met with community leaders, listening to their concerns and sharing her own experiences. Many were skeptical, at first unsure whether her efforts would lead to real change, but Evelyn's sincerity won them over, and soon she had built a coalition of allies eager to help reform the system. One evening, Evelyn addressed the entire department in a packed auditorium. Standing tall behind a podium, she delivered a speech that would become legendary among officers and citizens alike. Her voice carried authority yet compassion, striking a chord with everyone present. "Justice isn't just about catching criminals," she began. "It's about fairness, integrity, and accountability. It's about ensuring that those who wear badges uphold the values they swore to defend. Too often we've seen power abused, used not to serve but to oppress. That ends today," she paused, scanning the room. Some officers looked down at their feet, unable to meet her gaze. Others sat rigidly, their expressions unreadable. Evelyn continued, her tone growing firmer. "I'm not here to point fingers or assign blame. What I want is action. Real, meaningful change. We need better training, stricter oversight, and stronger safeguards to prevent corruption. We need transparency, not just for ourselves, but for the people we serve. Because when trust is broken, it takes years to rebuild." Her words hung in the air, heavy with significance. For many officers, it was a moment of reckoning. Some felt defensive, unwilling to admit fault. Others, however, recognized the truth in her message and resolved to do better. Among them was Detective Lisa Chen, who approached Evelyn after the speech. "That was incredible," Lisa said, her voice filled with admiration. "You've inspired so many of us to rethink how we operate." "Thank you." Evelyn smiled warmly. Thank you for standing with me, Lisa. Change starts with people like you, those willing to listen and learn. While Evelyn worked to rebuild trust within the department, the legal proceedings against Ryan and Harris moved forward. Both men faced multiple charges, including falsifying evidence, conspiracy, and abuse of power. Their trials attracted widespread media attention, shining a spotlight on the pervasive issue of police corruption. Witnesses testified about being coerced into false confessions, while victims of wrongful convictions shared their heartbreaking stories. The courtroom became a stage for justice, with Evelyn frequently called upon to provide expert testimony. Ryan struggled to cope with the consequences of his actions. Once cocky and self-assured, he now appeared broken, his confidence shattered. During cross-examination, he broke down in tears, admitting that he had acted out of desperation and misplaced ambition. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he stammered. "I wanted to make a difference. I never meant to hurt anyone." His words fell flat. The judge, visibly unimpressed, reminded him that intentions didn't excuse criminal behavior. "Your actions destroyed lives," she said sternly, "and for that, you will be held accountable." Harris, on the other hand, remained defiant throughout the trial. He denied all allegations, insisting he was innocent despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. His arrogance infuriated prosecutors and alienated even his own defense team. In the end, both men were convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms, their careers reduced to cautionary tales. For Evelyn, the victories were bittersweet. While she celebrated the exposure of corruption, she couldn't ignore the scars left behind, the lives ruined, the trust shattered, the injustices perpetrated in the name of law enforcement. She knew the road to recovery would be long and fraught with challenges, but she also believed in the resilience of humanity, in the ability to rise above mistakes and strive for something better. One afternoon, Evelyn visited a local community center where she had organized a town hall meeting. Residents gathered in a large hall, their faces reflecting a mix of hope and skepticism. Evelyn stood before them, her presence commanding yet approachable. "I know there's anger," she acknowledged, "and rightfully so. You've been failed by those meant to protect you. But I'm here to tell you that change is possible. Together we can create a system that works for everyone, not just the privileged few." Her words sparked a lively discussion, with attendees sharing their thoughts and ideas. Some suggested implementing civilian review boards to oversee police conduct. Others advocated for mandatory de-escalation training and body cameras for all officers. Evelyn listened intently, jotting down notes and promising to push for these reforms. By the end of the meeting, a sense of cautious optimism filled the room. People left feeling heard and empowered, knowing their voices mattered. For Evelyn, it was a small but significant victory, a step toward healing the wounds inflicted by years of neglect and abuse. As she drove home that evening, Evelyn reflected on the journey ahead. The fight against corruption was far from over, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Justice wasn't just a destination, it was a continuous process, requiring vigilance, courage, and unwavering commitment. And Evelyn Hayes was ready to lead the charge, no matter how daunting the path might be. The scandal involving Officer Ryan Carter and Detective Harris sent shockwaves through the city, leaving an indelible mark on both the police department and the community. While their arrests brought a sense of vindication to those who had long suspected corruption within law enforcement, it also opened old wounds and raised uncomfortable questions about accountability. For Dr. Evelyn Hayes, this was not just the end of one battle, it was the beginning of another. She knew that dismantling systemic corruption required more than punishing individuals. It demanded lasting reforms that would prevent such abuses from happening again. In the weeks following the trial, Evelyn threw herself into her work with renewed vigor. As DEA chief, she had always been committed to fighting crime, but now her mission expanded beyond drug cartels and criminal networks. Her focus shifted inward, to the very institution she served. She understood that true justice could only be achieved if the system itself was reformed, and she was determined to lead by example. Evelyn launched several initiatives aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within the department. One of her first moves was to establish an independent oversight committee composed of civilians, legal experts, and former law enforcement officers. This committee would review complaints against officers, investigate allegations of misconduct, and recommend disciplinary actions when necessary. It was a bold step, one that faced resistance from some quarters of the department. But Evelyn stood firm, arguing that public trust could only be restored if citizens felt they had a voice in policing. Transparency isn't optional, she told a group of skeptical officers during a training session. It's essential. If we want people to believe in us, we have to show them we're willing to hold ourselves accountable. Her words struck a chord with many officers, particularly younger ones who had joined the force hoping to make a difference. Among them was Detective Lisa Chen, who became one of Evelyn's strongest allies. Together, they worked tirelessly to implement new policies designed to foster integrity and professionalism. These included mandatory ethics training for all officers, stricter guidelines for evidence handling, and regular audits of case files to ensure compliance. But reform wasn't easy. Some senior officers resisted change, viewing Evelyn's efforts as an attack on their authority. Others quietly undermined her initiatives, spreading misinformation or dragging their feet when asked to comply. Even outside the department, critics questioned whether Evelyn's reforms were practical or even necessary. "She's trying to fix something that isn't broken," muttered one retired detective during a heated radio debate. "Crime rates are down. Why rock the boat?" Evelyn refused to let negativity deter her. She knew that progress often came with pushback, especially when entrenched interests were threatened. Instead of engaging in arguments, she focused on results. Slowly but surely, her efforts began to yield positive outcomes. Complaints against officers declined, and surveys showed a modest increase in public satisfaction with law enforcement. Community outreach programs flourished under her leadership, bridging gaps between officers and residents. One of Evelyn's most impactful initiatives was the creation of a mentorship program pairing seasoned officers with rookies. The goal was simple: instill values of integrity and empathy early in an officer's career. Through candid conversations and shared experiences, mentors helped mentees navigate the moral complexities of policing. Many participants credited the program with changing their perspective on what it meant to serve and protect. Despite these successes, Evelyn couldn't shake the lingering effects of her ordeal. Though she had emerged victorious, the betrayal she had experienced left its mark. Trust didn't come easily anymore, not even with colleagues she had once considered friends. Late at night, when the city slept and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders, Evelyn allowed herself moments of vulnerability. She thought about the lives destroyed by men like Ryan and Harris, the families torn apart, the futures stolen, and she wondered how many others were still suffering because of unchecked corruption. These reflections fueled her determination to create lasting change. She collaborated with lawmakers to draft legislation aimed at holding corrupt officials accountable. Known as the Accountability and Transparency Act, the bill proposed stricter penalties for misconduct, increased funding for civilian oversight boards, and protections for whistleblowers. It was a monumental undertaking, requiring countless hours of negotiation and compromise. But Evelyn believed it was worth every ounce of effort. As the bill gained traction, Evelyn found herself thrust into the national spotlight. News outlets hailed her as a champion of reform, highlighting her courage and resilience. Invitations poured in from universities, advocacy groups, and government agencies eager to hear her speak. At first, Evelyn hesitated, unsure if she wanted to embrace the role of public figure. But then she realized that her platform could amplify the voices of those who had been silenced for too long. Her speeches resonated deeply with audiences across the country. In one particularly memorable address, she spoke about the importance of humility and leadership. "True strength doesn't come from wielding power," she said. "It comes from recognizing your own flaws and working to overcome them. It comes from listening to those who disagree with you and learning from their perspectives. And it comes from using your position, not for personal gain, but to uplift others. Her words inspired a new generation of agents and officers committed to serving with honor. Young cadets at the police academy hung posters of her in their dorms, quoting her speeches during debates. Community activists adopted her mantra of justice for all as their rallying cry. Even politicians, often divided along party lines, found common ground in supporting her legislative efforts. Yet amidst the accolades and admiration, Evelyn remained grounded. She never forgot where she came from, or the lessons she had learned along the way. Every time someone thanked her for her work, she humbly redirected the praise to the countless individuals fighting alongside her. "This isn't about me," she would say. "It's about all of us. Change happens when we stand together." By the end of the year, Evelyn's reforms had transformed not just the department but the entire city. Crime rates continued to drop, and relations between law enforcement and the community improved significantly. Officers reported feeling more supported and empowered to do their jobs ethically. Residents expressed greater confidence in the fairness of investigations and arrests. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was progress. And for Evelyn, that was enough. Still, she knew the fight was far from over. Corruption was a hydra, sprouting new heads whenever one was cut off. Vigilance was key, and Evelyn vowed to remain vigilant for as long as it took. She often reminded herself of a quote she had read years ago: "Justice is a journey, not a destination." It was a reminder that the pursuit of fairness and equality required constant effort, and that complacency was the enemy of progress. One evening, as Evelyn sat in her office reviewing case files, Agent Marcus Lane knocked softly on the door. "You've done incredible work," he said, leaning against the doorway. "But don't forget to take care of yourself, too. You can't pour from an empty cup." Evelyn smiled, touched by his concern. "I'll be fine," she replied. "There's still so much to do." Marcus nodded, knowing better than to argue. "Just remember, you don't have to do it alone." For a moment, Evelyn allowed herself to relax, letting the warmth of friendship wash over her. Then she turned back to her desk, ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead. The road to justice might be long and winding, but Evelyn Hayes was prepared to walk it one step at a time. Years had passed since the scandal that shook the city to its core. The names of Officer Ryan Carter and Detective Harris had faded into obscurity, mentioned only in hushed tones as cautionary tales of ambition gone awry. But Evelyn Hayes's legacy endured, a beacon of resilience, courage, and unwavering commitment to justice. Her story became more than just a personal triumph. It served as a reminder of the power of integrity and the importance of accountability in shaping a better future. Evelyn stood on a stage at the police academy, addressing a room full of cadets clad in crisp uniforms. Their faces were eager, their eyes wide with anticipation. For many, this was the first step toward fulfilling lifelong dreams of serving their community. Evelyn scanned the crowd, her gaze steady yet kind. She carried no notes, no prepared speech, just decades of experience and wisdom earned through trials both public and private. "Today," she began, her voice calm but commanding, "I want to talk about what it means to be a guardian of justice." The cadets leaned forward slightly, hanging on her every word. "When you put on that badge, you're not just taking on a job. You're accepting a responsibility to protect, to serve, and most importantly, to do so with honor." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then she continued, her tone reflective. "Justice isn't blind, as people often claim. It's manipulated, twisted, and abused by those who wield power recklessly. And sometimes the greatest battles we fight are within ourselves, against our own biases, fears, and desires." The cadets exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement. Evelyn's story was well known among them. Many had read about her arrest, the corruption she exposed, and the reforms she championed. To them, she wasn't just a high-ranking official. She was proof that even in the darkest moments, light could prevail. "I once found myself sitting in a jail cell," Evelyn admitted, her voice softening. "Handcuffed, accused of a crime I didn't commit. At the time, I felt angry. Not because I was innocent, but because I knew how easy it would have been for others to fall victim to the same scheme. People without resources, without connections, without someone willing to fight for them. A murmur rippled through the audience. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, imagining what it must have been like to walk in her shoes. Evelyn let the silence linger before continuing. "That experience taught me something invaluable," she said, her voice firm again. "It taught me that justice isn't just about catching the bad guys. It's about ensuring we don't become the very thing we're fighting against. Every decision you make, every action you take has consequences, and those consequences ripple far beyond the moment." She stepped away from the podium, pacing slowly across the stage. Her movements were deliberate, her presence magnetic. "You'll face tough choices in your career," she warned. "Moments when doing the right thing might mean going against orders, risking your reputation, or standing alone. In those moments, remember why you chose this path. Remember the oath you took. Remember the people counting on you to be better." Her words struck a chord, resonating deeply with the cadets. One young woman raised her hand hesitantly. "Ma'am," she said, her voice trembling, "what if we make mistakes? What if we fail?" Evelyn smiled gently, her expression understanding. "We all make mistakes," she replied. "What matters is how we respond to them. Do we deny responsibility and shift blame? Or do we own up to our errors, learn from them, and strive to do better? True strength lies not in being perfect, but in having the courage to grow." The cadet nodded, visibly reassured. Evelyn returned to the podium, her demeanor shifting slightly. "Let me leave you with one final thought," she said, her voice carrying a note of urgency. "The badge you wear doesn't define you, it reflects you. It amplifies your actions, good or bad. Use it wisely. Because the world is watching, and the trust they place in you is fragile. Once broken, it takes years to rebuild." With that, Evelyn concluded her speech. The room erupted into applause, the cadets rising to their feet in admiration. As Evelyn stepped off the stage, several approached her to thank her personally. Some asked for advice, while others simply wanted to shake her hand. Evelyn greeted each one warmly, offering words of encouragement and insight. Later that evening, as Evelyn sat in her modest office, she reflected on the day's events. The gratitude in the cadet's eyes reminded her of why she had chosen this path all those years ago. Despite the challenges, the setbacks, and the heartache, she had never lost sight of her purpose. Justice wasn't just a profession, it was a calling, and she had answered it with everything she had. Her phone buzzed softly on the desk, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Agent Marcus Lane. "Great speech today. You've inspired another generation." Evelyn chuckled softly, typing a quick reply. "They inspire me too. Wouldn't be here without allies like you." As she set the phone aside, her gaze drifted to a framed photograph on her desk. It was taken shortly after her release from custody, surrounded by friends, colleagues, and supporters who had stood by her side during the darkest days. Among them was Lisa Chen, now a decorated detective leading community outreach programs. Evelyn smiled faintly, remembering how far they had all come. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges. Corruption hadn't disappeared entirely. It was a persistent shadow that required constant vigilance. But Evelyn took solace in knowing that progress had been made. The reforms she had championed had taken root, fostering a culture of accountability and transparency. Young officers entering the force were being trained differently, equipped with tools to navigate ethical dilemmas and resist the temptations of power. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. She thought about the countless lives touched by her work, the victims of wrongful convictions whose names had been cleared, the families reunited after years of separation, the communities empowered to demand fairness. Each victory, no matter how small, had contributed to a larger tapestry of change. But Evelyn also acknowledged the scars left behind. The betrayal she had experienced had altered her perspective on trust, forcing her to approach relationships with caution. Yet she refused to let bitterness consume her. Instead, she channeled her pain into purpose, using it as fuel to drive her mission forward. As midnight approached, Evelyn packed up her belongings and prepared to leave. Walking through the quiet halls of the precinct, she passed photos of past chiefs lining the walls. Someday, her portrait would join theirs, a testament to her contributions and sacrifices. But for now, she preferred to focus on the present, on the work that remained unfinished. Stepping outside, Evelyn breathed in the cool night air. The city stretched out before her, alive with lights and sounds. Cars honked in the distance, laughter echoed from nearby cafes, and sirens wailed faintly in the background. It was a reminder of the world she had sworn to protect, a world filled with flaws, struggles, and endless possibilities. Evelyn climbed into her car and started the engine. As she drove home, she allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. The journey had been long and arduous, but she had stayed true to her principles. She had fought for justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who believed in its promise. And though the fight was far from over, Evelyn Hayes was ready to keep walking the path she had chosen. After all, justice wasn't a destination. It was a journey, and she intended to see it through one step at a time.